Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin Minta. I'm a program manager at Embry Riddle, Daytona Beach. And we are very happy to let you know that we have participants from all three campuses here today with us, worldwide, Prescott, and Daytona. I think Val said you will be muted while the slideshow is up, but at the end, when we have the question and answer period, we will unmute you. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box, or you can wait until the end when the question and answer period opens. I'm just going to jump right in here and introduce our two presenters, Ben Brandt and Sean McCourt. Ben Brandt is an aviation systems engineer and portfolio manager overseeing the MITRE Corporation's global flight operations, civil military aviation integration efforts. Ben is responsible for developing and executing MITRE's strategy to work across sponsor portfolios in the MITRE National Security Center's efforts to link airfields, airspace, and aircraft for synergistic mission execution in civil and military controlled airspace. Since joining MITRE in 2008, Ben has held several project leadership positions. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering from Embry Riddle Aeronautical University and a Master's of Science in Technology and Policy from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His focus is on the intersection of airspace, air traffic control standards, and aircraft capabilities. He became a certified systems engineering professional in 2012 and is also a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force Reserve, serving in the Secretary of the Air Force's Global Power Directorate. Sean is a systems engineer and the aircraft and avionics architect for the MITRE Corporation. Sean's primary role at MITRE is to coordinate activities across the range of MITRE programs that implicate aircraft and avionics. Sean is also the project leader of the MITRE Aircraft and Avionics Evolution Team that tracks and projects aircraft next-gen capabilities. Sean earned a bachelor's degree in aeronautical science in 1990 and a master's degree specializing in human factors and safety management systems in 2011, both from Embry Riddle Aeronautical University. Prior to joining MITRE in 2008, Sean held several industry positions, including airline captain, Airline Director of Flight Operations, Technical and Air Traffic, Aircraft Acceptance and Delivery Pilot, and Director of Technical Avionics Programs. Sean has over 7,000 flight hours, including multiple type ratings across a range of turboprop, regional jet, and a large air transport aircraft. We are very appreciative that Sean and Ben have taken time from their busy work lives to join us here today, and I welcome them.
Over to you, Sean.
Thank you. Next slide, I guess. Well, good morning, good afternoon, I should say, and thank you again for having us and listening to us. And we hope you find our story interesting and can relate pieces of it as we go through these slides today for Ben and I, because the one thing we'll say is again, these are challenging and different times for sure. But aviation in particular goes through these periods. Some are worse than others. But I think, we want to tell a story about how we arrived where we are, which probably wasn't what we thought and planned, and hopefully you can draw something from it for your career paths. So to that end, I'll start and say, my introduction here is, when I was in high school, being an airline pilot was something I always thought would be fascinating and a lot of fun and really enjoyable. But my grades and my guidance counselors were pretty clear that when they gave me tests for what occupation suited me well, they thought a fireman or police officer would be a great place for me to focus my energies, and airline pilot career would be very competitive and challenging and maybe not a good fit. Fortunately, I had a relative in the airline business who had been a captain and president at TWA, who told me he'd never met anyone who wanted to fly airplanes that didn't eventually get there. And that was the information I needed to hear at that time. And that's a theme of, you know, recognizing when people give you that piece of information, you really need to take to heart. So from there, the guidance I got was, you know, go learn how to fly, go someplace where it's structured, learn the right way the first time, and that led me to Embry Riddle. So that was my my first steps into being a pilot and my career path. Ben, over to you.
Excellent. So Sean and I have somewhat different but very common threads throughout the presentation here. I also knew from the early days in high school that I wanted to be a pilot. Actually started taking pilot training in a Cessna 150 at BWI Airport and just outside Baltimore, and I grew up outside of Annapolis. So looked at and considered going to the Naval Academy. Then I realized they don't have a whole lot of pilots. So I looked at the Air Force Academy, and then I looked back at the Naval Academy and saw what the first years went through. And that just was not the experience I was looking for my collegiate experience. Fortunately, I had come across Embry Riddle at a high school college fair at my high school. And as I did more research, I was looking for the places I could go to potentially learn how to fly or get a degree that would eventually get me into the cockpit. So I opted to go to Embry Riddle. I also did ROTC to help fund my ventures there in Daytona. And the craziest thing is the Air Force would not give me a scholarship for being a pilot. They would only give me a scholarship for being an engineer. And that's how I ended up getting a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering. But that served me well. And with that, I'll kick it back to you, Sean.
All right, next slide. So got through Embry Riddle and got all the flying credentials and degrees I needed to have to go be a successful pilot. And I got out of that into that industry in 1990, which was not a good time for aviation. There were no great jobs in and around those early 1990s. They required an awful lot of time. So my first job out of Embry Riddle was right back to the landscaping jobs that I had done throughout high school and all through college to fund my Embry Riddle career, right back into landscaping. So there's me carrying the tree. I will say, interestingly enough, though, and again, you learn things along the way, and that time is never wasted. The company I worked for, and that time is landscaping, one, solidified. I didn't want to have a shovel in my hands for the rest of my life. I wanted to fly airplanes, my choice. But also the company I worked for was very strategic in their thinking and as an enterprise. And I'll say, yeah, I learned a lot about managing people. I had a job like that there that I was able to carry over into cockpits and at MITRE. I learned an awful lot about job execution, job planning. And I'll say that company, interestingly, today is a $30 million company, and we were just 8 people then, me carrying the tree. So those lessons stuck. But I did get that job flying and that flight instructing and doing all those normal civil jobs of flight instructing, and then moving on to corporate flying in a twin engine airplane for a large Fortune 500 company, who also happened to fly helicopters and Gulfstreams. So I really, finally, after staying with it for a while, I got that job. It took me about a year and a half after college to get that first flying job. But the way I got that job, I think, is important too. I'll state, I was down in Florida visiting my parents who had moved into Ormond, and the Embry Riddle job fair was going on. And it was a friend of mine was there and said, there's actually a company, we've both been looking for jobs for a year and a half. There's a company hiring and interviewing for pilots. And I said, nobody's hiring pilots. And they said, no, this one company needs flight instructors. I just interviewed. And so I sort of crashed their process without any preparation. I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't have my logbooks and all those things. But sort of forced my way onto the Embry Riddle campus and into those meetings, and they rewarded me with an interview and eventually a job. So again, it was sort of an opportunity to say, this isn't the right, I'm not prepared. I don't have the right clothes. I actually told them that. I apologize, but I heard you're interviewing for pilots and I desperately want a job. And they said, well, we like your motivation. We don't care about your clothes. We're hiring a person. So again, Embry Riddle sort of came through for me at that moment, created the opportunity, but at the same time, you need to recognize it. And so that led me on my career to start building my flight time, have that job I so desperately wanted. And in the right-hand corner, I say, I'll show you that there's an electrician there, because while I was flight instructing, I was working part-time to pay the bills as an electrician helper, where I learned an awful lot about electricity and things that I would apply later in my career that I never was exposed to, unlike Ben at Embry Riddle, because of my career path. So Ben, over to you.
Next slide. Yeah, my path wasn't quite as, I didn't force my way in as much as Sean did. Happy to say that as I was coming out of Embry Riddle in '98, there was a lot of demand for pilots, especially in the Air Force. Embry Riddle, and the whole reason why I decided to go to Embry Riddle, typically got 100 pilot slots from the Air Force every year. And there was only 100 pilot slots, and they typically got at least 6. By the time I graduated, they were taking 750 pilots from ROTC. And my class of 14, every single one of us walked out the door with a pilot slot. Challenge was the Air Force had cut back its training capacity. So I ended up waiting for a year. So things were on pause for me as far as going to pilot training. And I ended up on the flight line as a element chief working on the KC-135, responsible for about 60 maintainers. Got to crawl around the aircraft. It was during the Y2K, the crisis. Where everybody thought that planes were going to crash out of the sky. The financial system was going to crash. That turned out not to be the case, but I ended up being the engineering rep to go through the aircraft specs and learn about all the electronics and the avionics. And again, just like Sean, that ended up serving me very well later in my career. About a month before I was supposed to go pilot training, I had to go get a flight check out at Brooks Air Force Base in Texas, just outside San Antonio. And lo and behold, some eye surgery I had when I was a kid came back to haunt me, and had a depth perception issue. So I lost my pilot slot. So I sort of squandered around for about a year and a half trying to figure out what I was going to do, because that was my whole plan. Go be a pilot for the Air Force for 10 years, get out, become a commercial airline pilot. Basically Sean was my idol at that point. That didn't happen. However, they told me I was going to be an engineer, and I got offered to stay and do maintenance, but I figured I better not buck the system. I'm like John, bucking the interview process there at Embry Riddle. But they let me pick the aircraft I got to go work on as an engineer, and I picked the A-10, which turned out to be very interesting as the workload was moving from one Air Force base to another for all the depot maintenance. Basically where they strip the aircraft down to bare metal, take the wings off, you're climbing around the aircraft, fixing all the mechanical, hydraulics, structural parts of the aircraft. But it was just me as a 24, 25-year-old and another civilian engineer. We were the only 2 engineers there at the time because the workload was still transitioning out of the other Air Force base. So I got to learn a lot about every type of system on an airframe. Again, that came to be a huge value later in life. And then one of the more fun things I got to do was be an aircraft battle damage repair engineer. What you see in the bottom right there is an A-10 that took a surface-to-air missile hit in Macedonia during the Kosovo crisis. And a team, this happened just before I got to the A-10 program. So I unfortunately didn't get to actually do this for real. I did a lot of training for it. They actually went out, swapped the engine, patched up some of the shrapnel holes that were on the airframe, literally patched them up with duct tape, and the aircraft flew off about a week later. They, got all the hydraulic systems and pneumatic systems all hooked back up. So it was a really great opportunity in learning and applying my engineering skill that I learned at Embry Riddle. Next slide, please.
There we go. So after my, getting my flight hours and my credentials, and I finally landed that first, coveted regional job at the time, and those jobs were all turboprop 19-seat jobs, and that's the one on the top left. And I was so darn happy to have that job. I will tell you that as soon as I was hired, I experienced nearly within a month or two my very first furlough. So I was furloughed from that job in the top left corner, flying that turboprop, which was an old, antiquated, no bathroom, no autopilot kind of airplane. And I got furloughed, had to spend a few months right back to those electrician and landscaping jobs. So I had skills and I stayed employed. So that was good. And I got to come back from furlough into the airplane on the right, which was actually a brand new airplane at the time, and much more sophisticated, had sophisticated avionics. And so during that period, I was very junior for a long time, because it's kind of like now that we did some hiring. They called us back from furlough, but really I spent a long time on reserve, which meant 20 days a month, sitting in a hotel room, waiting to be called to fly. And often days just passed, we never flew. Just standby, ready to go with nothing to do. The airline asked for volunteers to help out in corporate, and they need, quote, some project pilots. And I just thought to myself, I'm wasting my time in a hotel room. I'd at least like to be productive, so maybe I'll go take advantage of that. And so it was sort of like the job fair idea. I said, well, I'll go do something. That job turned into proposing avionics programs within the airline, helping them comply with rules and regulations. And more importantly, the airline was just starting to buy regional jets, and they really needed to understand how to equip those. And so I grew from being a volunteer on reserve to, they said, we like you over here, keep flying, but we'll make you a manager. And then doing that job for a while, and they said, we'll make you a director. And I was able to be a captain on all the airplanes there and be a captain on the regional jet. But that's where I got to manage avionics programs and got just a fantastic opportunity, young in life, really. We were, the folks who usually have those jobs that were all at majors, and they'd all been at these things and engineers for 25 years, and I wasn't any of that. But I got that great opportunity simply because I was at this smaller company who happened to be moving on sort of the cutting edge of technologies. And we were the first airline to fully field GPS on our airplanes, on the airplanes you see on that screen, believe it or not. And now that's ubiquitous in the fleet. So again, great opportunity, hung in there through furlough. And then there was a second round of near furlough, but made it through to, like I say, be a director of flight ops tech and avionics programs by the end of that journey there for about 6 years. On to you, Ben. Next slide. Well, I guess my slide's in here next. That's okay.
You got a long history at the major, Sean.
I guess. So sure. I've got years on Ben, everyone, so bear with me. But no, so I was able to move successfully as the goal was, right, to always get to the majors, get the dream job. And as happy as I was at the regionals doing what I was doing, Delta provided the opportunity to come fly for them, and I took that opportunity. First as a flight engineer up in there in the top left, back when airplanes had lots of dials and switches, moving through the 727 as a first officer onto the 737 in my career. So I got to have some great experiences at Delta, and complete that journey to the cockpit that I set out back when I first joined Embry Riddle. Over to you, Ben.
You left out your 1 week at another airline.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Sean does have a couple years on me, but going back to you kind of making your own fate, as I had been mentioning, I kind of spent a year and a half trying to figure out what I wanted to do long term with my life. Thankfully, I had a brother-in-law who had gone through a program at MIT called the Technology and Policy Program. So he had turned me onto that, and I was able to convince the Air Force that it was wise to send me to school for a couple years and continue to pay me, so I didn't have to get the landscaping and the electrician job like Sean. But so I ended up at MIT for a couple years, did some research in avionics, sustainment, did some airspace policy work, which ended up translating into basically the job that I'm doing now. And it's a great program. It's really sort of an engineering management program with a touch of law. And it has classes that you can take classes in any of the engineering schools at MIT and take classes in the Sloan Business School at MIT. So it's a great mix. And I was really the only aviation expert there. Just so happens 9/11 happened about 2 weeks after I got to school. So it was kind of a strange time. Again, the airline industry went down. So I sort of realized that maybe I had made the right choice. If I had stayed in the aircraft maintenance, or if I had stayed out working on the A-10, I would have been over in the desert pretty quickly. And so I was able to spend those couple of years with my family and getting a degree that would lead me to my current position. Next slide. So as I mentioned, airspace policy, coming out of school, I just happened to luck out that was living in Massachusetts. There's an Air Force base up here that's actually has a program that's responsible for ensuring all the Air Force aircraft can interoperate in the airspace with those commercial airlines without running into them, which is hugely important, as you can well suspect. So we were dealing with technical standards, RTCA, if you're not familiar with that, used to be the Radio Technical Communications Administration, was a federal advisory committee to the FAA. That changed recently. They just go by RTCA, and they're now a private entity that develops standards, much like the SAE, the Society for Automotive Engineers. But we took a lot of those standards, technical requirements, and derived them down into what are the no-kidding requirements that need to be levied on Air Force aircraft to ensure we can fly in the same airspace that Delta and Southwest and all the other majors fly in. And oh yeah, by the way, we have to worry about globally what the different requirements are. And as you can see up there in the upper left there, the amount of standards or requirements is quite extensive around the world. A lot of this was driven by some events that occurred in the late 90s. An Air Force aircraft had controlled flight into terrain. Another aircraft had a mid-air collision with a Russian cargo aircraft. And that really drove the establishment of this need to ensure our the Air Force aircraft were interoperable in civil airspace. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so like Ben, well, I should say, 9/11 was a big impact, right, to the whole industry. And so for me at Delta, what it meant was that we were going to have, like pilots are facing now, either losing your job completely or being pushed back into those same kind of reserve, being junior, very disruptive to families and whatnot. And for me, I didn't really want to go through that, and I felt like I would like to try a different path rather than be away from my family for the better part of 2 years or so. So I took a leave of absence from Delta, and went to work for some avionics companies that at the time that I was familiar with and had worked with in my career at the airline and in industry. So they were eager and willing to hire me to help them with their programs and help them develop avionics, develop requirements, and really leverage my pilot knowledge, which was great, and flight deck operations knowledge, where they said, you know, look, we really want products that work for the pilots that will use these. And we're really smart engineers, guys like Ben, who can build these things, but we need some of that insight and the business, how airlines will approach the business case. And so I got a job doing some of that. And at the same time, my old company that I showed you those turboprops, they continued to grow and expand. And I was at an industry trade show when my old president saw me there, and I was selling avionics, if you will, or supporting avionics sales. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, this is what I'm up to." He said, "Well, you're not at Delta." I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you know, I could really use you if you would like to come back. We have an interesting opportunity." And that was the launch of an airline at the time of Independence Air. And that's the picture of the Airbus above. And he said, what we want you to do is come back and be Director of Flight Ops Technical, leveraging all your experience in cutting edge technologies. We want to make sure our airplanes are equipped as well as they can be, and would like you to lead that program. And then we'd also like you to, you know, sort of lead the efforts to receive the new aircraft. So basically to be a delivery and test pilot, they call it. You know, after they build it, someone has to go officially fly the airplane and help those who sign the paperwork ensure that the airplane is the right airplane to be buying. So I got all those experiences after 9/11. So it was really a recovery. And in airplane speak, we say unusual attitudes, recovery. But you got the opportunity once again to do something really interesting, really fun, and once again sort of go into things I'd never done before. I'd never flown international, and like I said, I was flying to Hamburg, Germany to pick up these new airplanes. That was great. I had not had experience in buying airplanes. That was interesting. And some of the new technologies of the time very much were head-up displays, as you see in the bottom, and also electronic flight bags and things like that, and tablet computers in the cockpit were cutting edge at the time. And we're able to explore those and select those for installation. So again, at the time, very fun, very interesting job, and for me, much more fun than, as I said, leaving my family for 2 years and in training events and whatnot. So not where I expected to be. I expected to be at Delta for 30 years uninterrupted, but still managed to sort of land on my feet in a place that I found enjoyable. I think is the key. Not where I expected or necessarily wanted, but it worked out quite well in my favor. Next slide.
So we'll shift gears a little bit here. So Sean and I have been talking about our history prior to arriving at MITRE. I think we both arrived at MITRE in the late 2000 timeframe, been there for 12, 13 years respectively. So MITRE is a federally funded research and development center, or FFRDC. It was established in 1958 to serve in the public interest. It's not for profit. It's a conflict-free environment. Basically, as I like to describe it, if one of our sponsors, who's a government agency, is doing something that doesn't make sense, we have the requirement to speak up and try to redirect them. Of course, a lot of that being based in science and technology, data analysis. There's a lot of work that MITRE does across the federal government, but originally it started in 1958, supporting the Air Force and a lot of the early nuclear command and control communications networks. Next slide, please. Currently, so like I said, MITRE started with the Air Force, and the Air Force portfolio is now within our National Security Engineering Center, the blue block on the top left there. And we also operate an additional 6 federally funded research and development centers. We have the Center for Advanced Aviation System Development, which is for the FAA. And that's where I fall as far as my role as a portfolio manager is crossing that boundary between our National Security Center, and our CASD, as it's pronounced, Center for Advanced Aviation System Development, FFRDC, and I try to identify where there are opportunities for integration, as well as supporting activities, what we like to call whole of government activities. We also have an FFRDC supporting the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Department of Justice, which includes the FBI, CIA. We also support the National Institute for Cybersecurity Standards, or NIST. And then there's a Center for Enterprise Modernization, which actually evolved out of supporting the IRS in developing data networks and ensuring that they can identify who has or has not filed their taxes. So you can thank MITRE for a lot of that. If you haven't filed your taxes yet this year, you might want to do that very shortly. I forget when the deadline is now that with COVID-19. Next slide. So where are we at today? I think when I started MITRE, we had about 4,500 employees. So it's grown quite a bit, up north of 8,000 employees. I think it's around 8,200 at this point. About 62% of our workforce has advanced degrees, but we do have folks that are technicians. We have folks that are your traditional administrative support, as well as doctorates. We actually have doctors on staff who have been pulled in to support COVID-19 efforts. And as you can see, when people come to MITRE, they tend to stay at MITRE for quite a long time, with the average years of service of 25. Or I'm sorry, average tenure is 12, but average years of experience is 25. We tend to bring in folks that aren't necessarily new to industry, but we do have a good mix. That number's actually come down quite a bit. I think it was up in the 30-year realm when I first joined MITRE, and I myself have about 25 years experience at this point. Next slide. Over to you, Sean.
So now we've covered what MITRE is and who MITRE is. For myself, that I landed at MITRE through my industry activities. I knew MITRE. MITRE supported an awful lot of the work, as Ben said, in standards committees, development of NAS infrastructure, improving operations. So when it came time to make sort of another change in my life, I reached out and asked MITRE colleagues and folks I had known in industry and said, might there be an opportunity for, unlike Ben, I'm not an engineer, through schooling. And I said, just with my background. And they said, no, that would be absolutely, we would very much like that. And I said, well, I really can't move to Washington, but MITRE said, that's okay. You can work from your home in Connecticut. We understand that. So it just made it very easy that they were flexible. And they said, we as Ben was alluding, MITRE understands you need a broad range of people. You need, as we said, we kind of need new people who have the cutting edge technology. You folks who are on the phone, who may be getting out of school or in school, you folks know how to apply technology far better than Ben and I do, in a way, the new technologies, now to use them, how to exploit them. What we bring is history and continuity and perhaps different insights. Put those things together. That's probably what makes MITRE successful. So for me, that was music to my ears. I got hired, and that's the leveraging my previous experience. And in my job today, I'm the aircraft and avionics architect. So I work mostly, as Ben said, for the FAA. On that side, I occasionally support Ben and some other activities on the military side as well. So it's kind of nice that we have the ability at MITRE to support a range of programs. I've supported Department of Justice programs. So we reach across the enterprise to find expertise when it's necessary and needed, and I found that quite interesting. And but primarily, I work for the chief scientist for the FAA for NextGen, informing him on, as he needs to make policy decisions, investment decisions for the evolution of the NAS and investments for the FAA. We give him at MITRE, we give them the unbiased sort of where is the state of the industry today, the capabilities of airplanes, and what's the likely future. of technologies and airplanes and fleets, so they can make decisions. The nice thing with again, MITRE is, and the reason we exist in that sense is that we're not selling anything. So I'm not trying to promote one technology over another, one particular airline over another, or a manufacturer. We can give them sort of an unbiased but educated perspective from our years in experience in industry. But while I was at MITRE, they also paid to assist in my schooling, and I recognized I should get that advanced degree, and that's how I went back to Embry Riddle through the worldwide campus, assisted by MITRE in terms of paying for it, to get my degree in human factors in SMS, simply because we do an awful lot of human in the loop studies, and I had that cockpit experience, and I really wanted to have the degree and the education to back up my involvement in those types of projects. So that was fantastic to have that opportunity through a worldwide campus to do that while full-time working, and that MITRE gave me the opportunity to ease the burden of paying for it. So I get to do a wide range of investigations into technologies, work with industry on exploiting new technologies, while also doing real live flight test sort of demonstrations and human in the loop studies. Okay, over to you, Ben.
Actually, I think you got this.
Oh, I've got one more. Yeah. So and here's a broad overview of the work, again, that I just mentioned. So the overall need here from the FAA and our sponsors is the common understanding of fleet composition and avionics evolution to effectively plan aircraft capability and costs for future FAA programs. So it sounds quite fascinating, and it is, and it sounds almost important, I'll laugh and say, but I never would have dreamed in a million years that somehow that would be my responsibility, my role, my job in life. To be honest, I wouldn't think I would even have the credentials or ability to influence such a thing. But as we've talked about our journeys, it's interesting how you learn things along the way, and hopefully take advantage of those to put yourselves into positions where, for me, this is a fantastic fit, and I really enjoy what I do day to day, and I'm thankful for those opportunities and the things that got me here today. Over to you, Ben.
Next slide. So, I too, as I transitioned into MITRE, I got introduced to MITRE when I arrived at Hanscom Air Force Base, working the avionics policy stuff down in the bottom right there. I decided I would get out of active duty of the Air Force for various personal reasons, and go into the reserves. But one of my first jobs was actually sort of moving downstairs in the same organization as MITRE, not as an Air Force military person, supporting landing systems. And the picture there with the two soldiers, or airmen, I should say, in fatigues, they are setting up and using a literally backpackable ground-based augmentation system, GPS augmentation system, precision landing system, and approach capability. So did that for a few years as a task lead, and then I became a project leader back in the avionics world. So that's sort of a step up. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about MITRE is I've been able to, you're not tied to one specific effort, and very rarely, even on my teams, do I have anybody that works full-time. We really believe in the diversity of the team as well as the diversity of the individual. Having people working on multiple projects allows them to bring experience and knowledge that they learned on one project to another. And that's worked out very well for me in my 12 years at MITRE. Through all that, I actually am now the portfolio manager, as Aaron had mentioned, responsible for basically MITRE support to the Air Force in fixed-based ground systems, systems like the instrument landing system, TACANs, airport surveillance radars, to mobile systems, mobile TACANs, mobile airport surveillance radars, mobile TACANs, and then also the aircraft avionics and all the Air Force weather forecasting and modeling capabilities, which is brought in. And this is where having some of the the new blood really comes into play of having folks that are knowledgeable in cloud computing and APIs and the software behind that. I started off life as pretty much a structural engineer, so trying to learn software and coding and cloud is a little bit beyond me, but I'm always happy to learn. And MITRE does give you that opportunity to take various classes to get smart on new technologies as you have time to. So really the portfolio that I'm responsible for is really concerned with the airspace. So things like navigation data, the terminal flight procedures or instrument flight procedures that are developed, those tools that are used to develop those procedures, and then how do those procedures get onto the aircraft and the aircraft avionics, things like GPS, data communications, ADS-B is a big effort, as you are well aware these days. And then also getting to the little bit softer side of things, personnel. So air traffic controllers, and we're looking at training for air traffic control and how to do that more effectively and be able to get air traffic controllers through training either faster or make it more effective for them by using some of these new technologies, things like not electronic flight bags, but tablets, and allowing those for kind of a continued learning opportunity. It really is a diverse opportunity. I can't say enough. I've thoroughly enjoyed working for MITRE. It's a very collegial atmosphere where you can always object respectfully to various ideas and have good debate, and no one really holds it against you as long as it's grounded in some sort of truth and I'll say numbers or data. And then with that, I think Sean, you got the next slide here, and we're getting pretty close to being done.
Yeah. So I think that this slide, and it's a transition slide to where are we heading next? Where am I heading next? I'm not sure. We're happy to be here at MITRE today. I'd love for my career to finish here. I don't know if that's where I'll be. I'm not sure. What I'll be doing for MITRE. If that's the one thing I've learned in this industry. Next slide. So, from my, sort of from my perspective, what I hope you sort of took away from today, and, sort of pearls of wisdom, if I have any, work hard, but be confident in yourself, take those chances, even when you think there's no way I'm qualified for this job, or, in my case, I didn't have the uniform to put on to interview properly. Be resilient. You're gonna, like now, people are gonna take their hits, not do the things they thought they were gonna do, but you gotta kind of roll with it and do something productive and get something from it. Have an indomitable spirit. Try not to be a defeatist. We all have good days and bad days, but aviation in particular is such a sine wave. There's a saying that airlines hire right up until the day they furlough, and that's about right. Airlines couldn't find enough pilots to staff classes last fall and this spring, right up until COVID-19. And now we'll talk about furloughing everybody. But then we'll, at some point here, we won't be able to get them back fast enough. So, you got to keep those things in mind in the big picture. It's hard, but want to stress that. Be flexible, because you just don't know where you're going to end up. And that's a good thing. You'll find your way to happiness. You just gotta keep going along the way. But important, as life changes, leverage that time at Embry Riddle you've had, or the experiences you've had through Embry Riddle, all your life experiences collectively. I think Ben and I have both shown you that, I didn't know that my time as an electrician was going to help me be smart about avionics. I didn't realize that being exposed to helicopters in a corporate operation was going to help me lead a project at MITRE about helicopters. I never really saw any of those things coming, but yet that's sort of how it works out when you get a chance to reflect. So I want to at least leave that with from my seat in closing, and I'll put it over to Ben.
Yeah, Sean, I didn't feel like I needed that moment slide here. I think you really hit the nail on the head. Roll with the punches, especially in this day and age. There will always be an opportunity. Sometimes it may not be to greatest or best opportunity, at least at that time. But if you have a plan to, if it's good opportunity to maybe go back to school, or, if a company has, even though it may not be the ideal company, has the, offers the education benefits that might benefit you, leverage those, even though if, you might leave in 4 or 5 years, whenever you're done paying back that money or time. The other one point that I'll probably add here is, Sean and I didn't know each other before probably about 5 years ago, when we started working on a project together. And we've really become sort of relying on each other and keeping each other up to speed on what's going on in our various domains, and identifying where there might be opportunities for interaction and integration across the work programs. Some of the information I've provided him, he's been able to take back to the FAA chief scientist. And likewise, some of the information I've gotten from him, I've been able to influence how my sponsor does some things. So, take advantage of, even if it doesn't seem to be a great opportunity, take advantage of every opportunity, and don't shy away from challenges. So with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. And I'd also like to thank Aaron and Val for putting this webinar together. It was really a pleasure to be able to do this and offer our insights to those who are either still in school or recently out of school, or even alumni. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. So everyone should be unmuted. You might have to unmute yourself if you have a question, but from our end, you're unmuted, I believe. You can put it into the chat box if you're feeling shy, or just go ahead. And I have a few that came in also.
Why don't you tee it off, Aaron?
Okay.
We'll get warmed up.
Is there anything different you would tell your past self if you could go back to 2001 or 2008, sometime in the past?
Ben, you talk to yourself a lot, so what do you have to say for that?
Thanks, Sean. I'll be honest with you. In hearing Sean's story and how he kind of busted him into the interview, right? There are times when I wish I had spent a little bit more time on the flight line when I was working, waiting for my year to go to pilot training. That year was probably the most valuable, and not so much from learning technical things, but from the leadership aspect of things, learning how to manage. Here I am, 23 years old, fresh out of college, and most of the people I'm managing are in their mid to late 30s. We had a couple of young 20-year-olds. Of course, they were always the problem children, enlisted folks. But for the most, they looked up to me, even though they were 15 years my senior. And I really learned a lot about trusting them, and how that comes back and trusting me. So if I had to do it all over again, I would have spent another year or two in that environment, because I really did learn a lot from that environment on leadership. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, I think, in that time frame, in particular, post 9/11 and whatnot, and, being faced with the challenges at Delta and my choice to leave, which ultimately would have become a furlough. And I had the opportunity to go back to Delta, and I would have been a captain even, but it also would have put me right there today, back in the same situation of being sort of a junior pilot and all that, but employed. I think when that time came, I would not, again, still have ever envisioned that I was going to, quote, achieve the things I wanted to in an airplane. I'd gotten to Delta. I hadn't yet flown international. I hadn't flown the range of airplanes I wanted. I didn't have all those experiences. And I really, for a short period, felt, boy, I failed. I was at my career. My career just evaporated. I didn't know where to recover from 9/11. I didn't know what that would look like. So I think it did work out, and I worked hard to try to make it work out. But I think I I had more fear than I needed to have. Now, fear can be motivating, so that's good, right? But it's also, it was too many sleepless nights that I didn't need to have, because I just, I sort of didn't trust in myself quite enough, even at that point, that it was going to work out. So if I had to look back, I'd have said, you know, trust in yourself. And that's why I put that on that closing slide. You know, you really believe it right now. You know, these are the times, you know, whoever you are out there and whatever you're doing, it is going to work out. You just gotta keep hanging in there and roll the punches, as Ben said. It sounds easy, but it's not.
Okay, I'm going to give just a pause. If anyone has a question, just unmute yourself.
Hi. So I've been reading about MITRE and your virtual internships, and I wanted to know, do you have any employees that or interns that get positions virtually full-time after that internship, or is that just for the time being that they're interning?
Let me take that, Sean.
Sure.
Yeah, so the virtual internship is a direct result of COVID. MITRE loves having interns. It's great if we can have them at our two main campuses, because you really get a good exposure of MITRE more broadly. But obviously, because, I mean, I'm teleworking, MITRE for me is 45 miles away. I live south of Boston, and I work up at the Bedford, Mass campus. As far as going forward, we're being told this may be the new normal, where people are largely teleworking, and then in the office 1 or 2 days a week as needed for various meetings. There are a number of people, I work with a number of people that are telework employees. We also have, I forget what the exact number is, I think it's right around 30 sites across the United States. We have one in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, you know, Tampa, Orlando. Those are some of the garden spots. But then we also have a site in Colorado Springs that's pretty big. But then we also have some teleworkers. One of the folks that Sean and I both work with lives in Wisconsin, for example. So, you know, there's a lot of flexibility as far as working remotely. And I think that's even going to become more so as time goes on here with this new environment.
And I think I'll just add that, you know, Ben and I both hired interns from Embry Riddle. Well, we have brought on interns from Embry Riddle to our programs. And Ben, I know you've hired some interns, you know, people who've made the jump from intern to new hire. So I don't expect in this new environment, as Ben's alluding to, it's forced upon us. We all have to grow with it. So I would expect that, you know, those same paths still exist from internship to being a new hire.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I had one intern that became a straight hire after a couple of years of interning in the summer, and then two others that I hired directly out of school. They're both from the aerospace engineering program. One was a bachelor's and the other was a master's.
So with that, when you're looking at resumes of interns, what are the things that stand out for you when you're reviewing them to see if they're a fit for MITRE as well as your programs?
Well, you know, MITRE in general is always looking for strong technical skills. Of course, you know, very good GPAs, competitive for the other universities and the competitive landscape is with other universities and other potential interns, right? So it's how you stack against those folks, I'll say. But then Ben and I, as we'd alluded in times we'd down at Embry Riddle at job fairs and whatnot, but you have to have some differentiator, right? And folks who, you know, you perceive, you know, there's value beyond the grade. And I think that was one of the takeaways from my career. And, you know, also is, again, get all the credentials you can. And Ben and I have said, and I think we said it maybe a similar event we had here like this one, you know, the person who works full time while going through Embry Riddle, like you can understand if they're competitive, but gosh, their GPA is 0.1 less than someone else's and it's a tie, the GPA doesn't have to be the complete tie factor, so to speak, right? Because you have to look at, well, what other credentials, what other things are in play? And then you look at someone who said, boy, they were working a job. They were balancing these other demands on their time, their involvement in these other groups and industries that might be interesting and important. So there is an element of total person that I know Ben and I try to look at and consider, at least in our worlds, for the roles we have to hire. But at the same time, MITRE's an academic place, and some of the best and brightest certainly find their way to MITRE from universities. So, Ben, what would you add?
I concur with every bit of that. And that, one of the things I've noticed in the couple of years that we've been interacting with Embry Riddle Career Services is the amount of additional, I'll say, minors that the students are taking or have available to them and pursue. So having that sort of diversity, having different interests is another, I'd say, attractor for me. But I definitely agree with Sean. Having been somebody in the summer taking, thermodynamics and fluid dynamics in the summer classes while working 3 jobs, it was. I definitely respect people that work hard and have multiple things going on. Even if it's not working, some of the extracurricular activities as well. Just seeing that kind of well-roundedness of an individual.
We're down to 3 minutes, and I want to give everybody a chance, if they have a question that hasn't been asked, to unmute themselves if you want. Otherwise, I do have one other question that I think is pretty good. Okay, so if a graduate has a dream company, but that company is not hiring right now, what are some of the ways that you would recommend they engage with that company under these conditions with the pandemic? In other words, if someone's dream job is MITRE and you guys aren't hiring, what are some of the ways that you would welcome that person to still be engaging with your company?
Yeah, Ben, you might be able to talk about the best pathway, but what I would say is what you want to do is there's still the ability, like Ben and myself or others, to find those people that you can make contacts with, mentors that that are willing to engage with you. Like I said, we're not hiring now, but when we hire, these are the kinds of skills we'll be looking for. These are the kinds of experiences we realize you can't get right now, right? You're waiting. So, so there's how to get yourself into, I'll use MITRE as the example. How do you get yourself through the door to get connected to people that would be willing to engage with you? I'll kind of defer to Ben, who might be better to answer that, but I will say that finding those people, finding ways to engage with staff, people that work there through alumni associations, like through the Embry Riddle Alumni Association, right? Might be a way. Because that way you have somebody who might be able to help influence you when the hiring does happen, but also guide you along the way. Probably gives you your best shot, I would believe. But Ben, do you have any suggestions too about the how we even handle that at MITRE, like mentor? I'm not sure how we do that. I know how we do it internally. I don't know how we do it with externals.
Yeah, so I mean, MITRE has an academic engagement group that goes to various colleges. I mean, so you have the typical career fairs, but I think, Sean, you hit it. You leveraging the alumni network. It's probably a lot easier now than it was, back in '98 when I graduated, and that you have LinkedIn as a way to connect. I think, Dorisha, you took advantage of that today. So, looking for somebody, from Embry Riddle, you can search for whatever that company is, and just making those connections, reaching out. You just never know. Again, that's sort of don't be afraid to take that risk, take that leap. What's the worst they can say? No. I know MITRE ourselves, have throttled way back on our hiring because we expect with the downturn in the market that our attrition is not going to be as high. So we are sort of on hold, even though we have various job postings out on our website. But, I think most companies are kind of in that, wait and see period right now. And as the summer, as we move along in the summer, I foresee that that'll open up a little bit more. But again, don't be afraid to leverage those networks, leverage career services. They may have a contact in that key company that you're dying to get into. I'll also caution that the grass may seem greener on the other side as well. So you may not be getting into Boeing, but maybe I get in I don't know, some other OEM or manufacturer. Just take your opportunities and continuing to look if it isn't a good fit.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone, for coming. That is a wrap.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks again.